What's going on, everybody? It's Rev, and welcome back to another Dauntless video. In this video, I'm going to teach you everything that you need to know about armor and how to read the character sheet when you're going into your loadout screen. And so that's where we're going to start. We're going to go into the loadout screen by going into the main menu and going to equipment. And I want to direct your attention to the very top of the screen where it says power and resistance. Your power is directly correlated to how much damage you're going to deal to behemoths based on your power level versus the behemoth threat level, as well as the resistance, which is the same thing, how much damage you're going to mitigate versus a specific threat level of behemoth. And so if you look at the hammer and all my gear here on the left, that is where all these numbers are coming from. I have 100 on the recruit's hammer as well as 22 on the lantern. As a disclaimer, a beginner is not going to have any power or resistance on their lantern, so don't worry about that. If you're curious, like, why do I not have any power or defense on my lantern, it's because it's from a new game mode that just got added into the game. Now, let's talk about how to read this. Now, at the very, very top left of the portrait of the piece of gear, that is the level of said gear. So if you look at the hammer and the rest of my armor here, it says it's level 1. Recruit gear cannot be upgraded, and so it's staying at level 1. However, all of the behemoth armor can be leveled up to plus 15, which is what this particular piece of gear is. The Nasher cap is at plus 15. Thus, it has a resistance of 138. That is the cap for a particular piece of gear. And let's see, what else can I cover? Moving into said piece of gear, let's talk a little bit more about passives. Every piece of armor has a passive. In this case, the Nasher cap has plus 3 bloodless. As a new piece of armor gets crafted, let's say it's plus 0, you just crafted a new piece of behemoth armor, it is going to start at plus 1. At plus 6, it goes to plus 2, and at plus, I believe, plus 10, it goes to plus 3. And while it caps out at plus 3 at level 10, at level 15, it will remain level 3 or a plus 3, and at level 15, that is the cap. Moving on to the cell sockets for each particular piece of gear. Much like a passive, every piece of armor has a specific cell slot that can't be changed. By clicking on said cell slot, you can view the list of that particular family and kind of scroll through and choose to equip one. This is how you socket your gear. It's very straightforward, very simple. But just know that cells are a consumable item, and that is what goes in this particular socket. One more additional thing I want to talk about for armor is that next to the resistance rating, if you're wearing elemental armor, you're going to have an elemental benefit or weakness. And so we have 138 here on my Hellplate cask, plus 25 resistance versus fire, and minus 25 versus ice. I just want to point out these are just additional resistances. It's not plus 25 of nothing and some new stat. It is just additional resistance. That's going to do it for the character sheet. I'm going to transfer on over to Moira Highscatter, the armor smith in Ramsgate, and we're going to talk about what's the best armor for early, mid, and late game. And so we're here at Moira. We're going to dive right into the menus and talk about some armor here in the crafting menu. And I'm looking for a particular behemoth that, by no mistake, is one of the first that you fight. In the tutorial, you will fight a Nasher, and Nasher's that big old beaver, and when you are prompted to craft some of the gear, you're actually going to have to craft the helmet that I'm currently wearing, which is the Nasher cap. Now, if I was a new player, I would go ahead and craft the rest of the set. The chest, the boots, and the gloves all offer some of the best defensive and offensive perks in the game, especially for a new player. And I want to go a little bit more in depth on that because the chest has Tough, which is one of those defensive perks that I was talking about. It offers additional health and plus 15% increased healing from all sources. You can see how that will be beneficial to a new player. Now, it also has a defensive slot that you will be able to socket more Tough into and get more health, which will help with your defensive capabilities. Now, the boots and the gloves, let's talk about the boots because the boots also have a passive for Tough. So as a new player, you'll be able to get +3 Tough almost immediately, which is really, really good, highly recommended, and it's just going to make your beginner learning much more streamlined and much more enjoyable, and you'll worry less about dying and more about having fun. Now, the boots and the gloves have 2 power sockets and a passive power cell is Rage Hunter, which is also passive on the gloves. And every time a behemoth enrages, you get increased damage. And I would say that this damage perk is effective on 95% of behemoths. And so you don't need to do anything to activate it. You just need to deal damage and eventually a behemoth will enrage. If you get any additional Rage Hunter, you should definitely throw in a cell in your boots or your gloves and stack that as much as you can. We've talked about the chest, gloves, and the boots, but I want to go back and talk about the helmet because the helmet doesn't really offer you anything that will help you in the long term. And so if you're feeling like you want to min-max, I highly recommend crafting the Embermane helmet or the Drask helmet. It's definitely worth crafting both if you have the materials along the way. These are some early behemoths that you'll be able to kill and get quests for, and so you'll be able to at least craft one of these pieces. And so I would highly recommend the Embermane helm, and that's because it has a nice spread of damage perks as well as a mobility cell, which is more of like a convenient cell. You can socket something that will make it so you can roll more, or your stamina regeneration will come back faster, for example. But it also gives you more damage in the form of attack speed, and attack speed is something that goes really well with damage and survivability. It's more of like a spread of both, because when you attack faster, you'll be able to roll out of your attacks faster, as well as deal more damage because you're getting more hits in. And so I highly recommend the Drask and the Embermane helmet to replace the Nasher helmet, as well as all the Nasher pieces that I talked about just before. Now, ironically, all of these armor pieces that I'm going to talk about for mid-game are very, very close to the beginner sets. The Hellion set is one of the best in the game. I would argue the best in the game. It is a mid-game set that has high offensive capabilities. So not only in the beginning are you able to craft one of the more balanced and more defensive armor sets, you then graduate into one of the most offensive armor sets. And so you can kind of see how this is going. I want to note right here that every piece of armor can be upgraded to +15, and they, no matter, even if the Nasher, the easiest behemoth in the game, has +15 armor, it's going to be the same as a +15, hardest behemoth in the game. They all offer the same amount of resistance. That being said, the Hellion gear has some of the best spread of attack speed, damage, and utility in the game. It has a passive of Rage Hunter, which we talked about on the Nasher gear, as well as some technique slots, which will further your attack speed, crit, and other damage dealing perks, as well as a new cell called Molten. And Molten generates Molten Hearts, which are like these little lootable pickups that you just run over, and they give you move speed, attack speed, and fire immunity. This is going to be great for fighting fire type behemoths, and you can push that bonus even further by picking up the gloves, which also have molten and a power cell on it. Now, to balance out the amount of offensive capabilities, I'm going to point your attention to the Karaback boots. The Karaback boots offer +3 conditioning, which is an additional 15 stamina regeneration a second, which is really, really strong for honestly any player that's just learning how to play and how to dodge. This means you can dodge more. This means you can use your attacks that consume stamina more, and it just feels more fluid to play with this perk. And so I highly recommend, for a mid-game set, 3 pieces of Hellion and the Karaback boots. I have a whole separate video on a build like this on my channel if you're so interested in learning more. I'm going to point out some honorable mentions because the 2 sets that I've just listed are totally fine for carrying you all the way to late game. However, if you're a Warpike player and you're just starting the game, the Quillshot helmet and the Quillshot jacket are very strong for assisting you in wounding and dealing extra damage to wounded parts. Savagery has one of the highest damage modifiers in the game, and so it makes Warpike really, really good in the early game. More than expected. And so that's for the Warpike almost exclusively in the early game, and this is something that you'll wear into the late game if you are playing Warpike almost exclusively. Now, for late game armor pieces, let's talk about Rezakiri. Rezakiri is one of the last behemoths that you'll ever fight. However, it has some really nice party play capabilities in a new cell called Conduit, which is when you use your Lantern ability, you'll grant attack speed to yourself and all other Slayers in your party for 10 seconds. It stacks really nicely, and it's the best attack speed perk if you're playing in a party. Technique slots are also nothing to scoff at. It can increase your attack speed, crit, and just damage across the board, and so these are really great pieces. The helmet and the gloves are really great pieces to craft once you enter that late game phase. As a little bit more of a niche, the Koshai boots are highly coveted because they offer really high skill ceiling damage perks in Predator. Predator is a passive damage bonus that is active so long as you don't get hit. If you do get hit, it gets disabled for 15 seconds and then it will come back. It's a really, really nice just passive damage all the time. And so players that know how to dodge and know how to position really well are going to find Predator very, very useful. Honorable mentions also go to the Koshai gloves. Evasive Fury is one of my favorite attack speed perks, and it also has a power socket, which are both very high value perks, and I highly recommend them for the late game. There are some more niche builds like Low Life that I'm not really going to suggest to a new player, but there are perks like Iceborne that will help you pick up a build like that if you're really, really interested. So honorable mention goes to the Boreas gear. Pretty much all of the entire armor set will give you a nice low life build spread. However, you are going to be wearing all ice armor, which means you're going to take a lot of extra damage from fire behemoths. So keep an eye on Iceborne is really the gist to take away from that, but it is an option. Now, there's one more thing I want to cover, and that's actually at the weapon screen, because it does offer something that is highly defensive, and let's just talk about that really fast. Running over to the weaponsmith wheels, I want to dive into the crafting menu and talk about, honestly, not any particular weapon type, but a behemoth's set of weapons. And we're going to talk about Skarn's weapons. Skarn is a very easy behemoth to take on so long as you bring a blunt weapon. And the unique effect on it gives you a refreshing shield so long as you're dealing damage. And so it really allows you to fill the gap, if a difficulty gap, if you're getting really beat up by a particular behemoth. You can bring this weapon and it will shield you from a lot of incoming damage, and it will just kind of pad the difficulty curve, which is really helpful for a new player. And so while this isn't a piece of armor, it's a weapon that you should definitely look out for because it's going to make the game easier for you. that's pretty much all I want to cover for this armor slash weapon video, I suppose. Thank you guys so very much for watching. If you like this video or it helped you, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and if you really want to support the channel, you can use creator code RevvyRad in the Dauntless in-game store. Thank you all again very much for watching, and I will see you on the Shattered Isles.